In this tiny tutorial, we're going to talk about making local selections on the iPhone with our photographs. And the app I'm going to talk about pretty much exclusively is PhotoWizard, which you see here on my home screen. I'll highlight it there. In fact, I'll even wiggle it around so you can't miss it. There's PhotoWizard prominently displayed right there on row number 3. So I'm going to launch PhotoWizard and then open an image. And I made a special folder down here, a special library called Carmel Demo. And let's open this image, which is actually from Holland from a couple weeks ago. Now in this image, I'd like to darken the sky, particularly the upper left region of the sky, because it falls off a little bit brighter in that upper left corner, and I'm afraid the viewer's eye might get drawn out there. Now in some other apps like Snapseed, I could make a local selection, but it wouldn't be kind of a gradual progressive gradient. And that's where PhotoWizard really shines. So what I have to do is tap that mask button in the lower right of the screen, and I'll do that right now. And you can see that little icon looks like a mask, just turned blue, but that didn't give us any hint what to do next. Nothing changed in the image. So this is just something you have to learn. I'm going to tap the gear icon in the upper right, and then that brings up all of PhotoWizard's selection tools, and I'll scroll across here. So you can see it's got an eraser, which if we select too much we can erase part of the selection. Has a very good magic wand, which we'll talk about here in just a moment. And then we can select by similar color, what they call color range. We can manually brush a selection. We can lasso a selection. We can make square or elliptical kind of selections. But this one down here that I just tapped, which is now squared off in blue, you'll see it's called linear gradient. And that's what I want. So to get rid of this dialog box right now that I've selected linear gradient, I'm just going to tap anywhere on the image. And then, just as I would in the darkroom if I were moving a burning card, I'm going to tap with my finger near the horizon and then drag into that upper left corner. And you can see I'm going back and forth more than I would normally, so you can see the action. So I'm dragging up towards that corner. Now watch what happens. Do you see how most of the image is in a checkerboard, translucent, or unselected mode? So that part of the sky that has remained opaque, that's what I'm going to be working on. So it's important that you remember the translucent areas when you make a selection are not going to be affected by whatever you do, and the opaque areas will be. And this is nice and progressive. From the horizon, it's barely selected, and you can see it get more opaque as it goes towards that upper left corner, which is exactly the kind of effect I want. So now I've made my selection. What am I going to do to it? I'm going to tap on Filters down in the bottom row. And that brings up a rather wide selection of different filter effects. And of course, we're going to go down to curves right there in the middle, which is just my favorite and the most powerful thing we have in all of digital imaging, whether it's Photoshop or the iPhone. And watch, I'm going to do something extreme so you can really see it. See how that corner is getting really dark? Or if I yank that curve up like this, really light, whatever I do, it's applied just to that corner. But if I do something rather subtle, because it wasn't that much brighter, I can make that upper left corner and I'll shape that curve just like that. I've brought my white point in the upper right down a little bit and brought the midtones of the curves down a little bit like that, midtone of the image. So let's hit that checkbox in the upper right corner to apply that. And then I'm going to hit the home button so I can kind of do undo, redo. And see as I'm doing that undo, redo? And we have those undo, redo buttons up there in the top, which I could tap to go back and forth. But it's even easier. You can swipe with your finger to undo. I just swipe left on the image, and if I swipe right, it does a redo. So it's a very fast and easy undo, redo kind of functionality. Easier than going up and tapping those little tiny arrows in the upper right of the screen. Now that worked pretty well. Let's use another one of PhotoWizard's selection methods. Let's use the magic wand to select this area, the dark grass down there right on the shoreline in the foreground. So I'll go back to mask. Now notice that our sky is still selected. That's one of the neat features of PhotoWizard. But it might get you confused. These selections are enduring. That is, they'll remain active until you either turn them off by hitting that X in the upper left corner or make a new one. So I'm going to start from scratch. I hit that X, which looks like chopsticks. And then to choose a different selection method, I'll tap that gear and slide over, and I am going to choose the magic wand tool. Now, before we tap this, notice there are a couple controls. There's a threshold slider, which just like in Photoshop, will make that magic wand more or less discriminating. The magic wand tool selects based on similar tonality and color. So if I take this way down and tap, say, on that dark region of that shoreline, boy, I didn't even see anything get selected. It was so little. Watch, I'll tap somewhere else, and it's selecting so few pixels I can't even see it. If I take threshold all the way up by comparison and tap in that same region, watch what happens. Whoa, it got a lot more of that grassland. It went all the way up into the church in the background. So that's way too little discriminating. So let's undo that and go back in here, and let's try something kind of a low middle, like around 30-some%. And now let's see what happens when I tap on that dark grass region. That's pretty much it. But, and I'm even going to undo that because I didn't show you one other control. We talked about threshold here, so that makes sense. But then below there we have mask edge, and we can have a hard, smooth, or feathered edge. And there's no magic right thing. I will give you a hint. It's very rare that you're going to want a hard edge. Their default, which is smooth, works very often, but sometimes you want more of a feather. Now here's my advice. It's better to go a little bit too hard because we can fine-tune that, whereas if you go too feathered initially, you can't get rid of that smoothness. Let me give an example. I'm going to click on their default smooth, and once again tap on that dark grass, and I'll even add with a second tap to build that up a little bit. Now, if I tap not on that gear in the upper right, but what looks like a brush icon right next to it, that lets us actually change the softness on the edge of that selection. Now notice the word they use, smoothen, that's not even a real word. So odds are the developer, English isn't their first language. But to use their terminology, we're going to smoothen the edge of that. Now if I go too much, you can see that gets to be a very soft selection. But this is great. You can fine-tune how progressive and how soft the edge of that selection will be. And I'm going to go about that much, around like 21%. And then, now remember what I said earlier? The transparent or the checkerboard area is not going to be the area acted upon. So I need to inverse this selection. And we do that up next in the top left corner, not on the chopsticks, which would cancel the selection, but right next to it, the black and white icon. When I tap that, it just inversed my selection. So now I see that's what I'm going to be working on, that shoreline which had that dark foliage in it, and not all the rest of the image, which is represented by the checkerboard. So now that we have that right, I'll tap the filter button at the bottom, bring up curves, and watch what happens as that's sweet, isn't it? And I'll go a little bit overboard so you can really see it on your screens. And remember, to get that curve away temporarily so we can see the image, you just tap above the curve anywhere, and there it is. If I want to apply that by hitting the check mark, then I can swipe and go back and forth. Oh, excuse me. Let me get back to the home button. I can swipe to undo, redo, and I'm just swiping with my finger. Remember, I could go up to those undo, redo buttons in the upper right, but there's undo, redo. So there we talked about in PhotoWizard using the gradient tool to make a nice linear progressive selection for say the upper left corner of the sky, and then we also used the magic wand tool to make a local selection. And remember, you can only do so much working globally, that is, using controls that work on the entire image. The real artistry and the real finesse comes in making local selections to control the color, the contrast, the tonality, and the sharpness in your images. So I hope this little expose on PhotoWizard is really helpful in your iPhone image editing.